Nigel Farage has said Reform UK's dominance on social media has won it a rapidly growing following among the under-18s, who could boost the party's chances at the 2029 election. The Reform leader said his party's surge in popularity with young people had yet to convert into votes, as many were too young to actually go to the ballots this time round, which is really, really interesting. This is a story in The Telegraph, I think it is today, and it's a fascinating story, isn't it, Claire? Because I wasn't even aware of this. I don't do TikTok. I'm not the generation who does TikTok, even though I'm the same age as Nigel Farage, who does do TikTok and has got a huge following on it. And this is actually the amount of youngsters who are still too young to vote, but, 15, 16, 17-year-old, mainly boys, who are big fans of Reform and Nigel Farage.
No, there are. They are. And the other funny thing about this is that it was before the general election on Thursday, the Reform Party were the party that was the party of TikTok. Now, it's a very, very, very attuned thing for them to have done from a PR point of view, because it's worked, they've engaged. But the reality is, we've got journalists like Beth Rigby asking Nigel Farage, what do you think about Andrew Tate? Now, Andrew Tate, of course, is, in my view, an abhorrent creature of a man, but he has got a huge cachet amongst specifically young men.
Because he preaches masculinity, doesn't he?
Toxic masculinity. He's a high-grade misogynist, let's be honest. But Nigel Farage, he's very clever. He's a very clever man. He said, I do think that he has got an impact on young men, not condoning, but not saying he's abhorrent on the other hand.
Except the stuff he said about, oh, isn't it ridiculous telling people to go to football and not have a drink, to not make...
But that's him knowing what he's doing,
yes,
Jo.
But Claire, you get into that, and to me, and I think, the three of us as women, we know too many men who've gone, oh, for goodness sake, it's a bit of banter, get over yourself. And I think that's so unhealthy.
I don't think that's particularly unhealthy as such, but what I do think is that things like the way that we vote in this country should be taught in schools.
Oh, completely.
Yes.
De rigueur. Yeah. Because they have to know, they have to buy into what they have to do. I'm not in agreement of lowering the voting age down to 16, because I don't believe a 16-year-old has got, a formed mind enough to make that pivotal decision that will affect the next 4 years of their lives and our lives as members of this society. However, I think it's wonderful that he's getting them engaged, and as we rightly said, for Reform and Farage, it's mostly young lads, but for the Green Party, it's mostly young girls.
Young women. This is a poll by JL Partners, by the way, that would put Reform in second place behind Labour among 16 to 17-year-old young men, with 23% saying they would vote for the party. And, going back to what you were saying just now, Jo, this was that comment about going to football and being a boy, boys will be boys. It took place in a boxing gym in Clacton, which is obviously Nigel's constituency. And he was saying, talking about the emasculation of young men to a captive audience. And that's when he came out of the football quote. Go to Germany, have a few beers, enjoy yourself, and who's telling you can't make jokes about the Germans? Of course you can. He, as Claire said, he's not stupid. He knows what he's doing. He knows how to talk to people. He might,
but his followers don't always. And I think that's...
Isn't that quite a patronising thing to say, Jo?
Not really. I mean, we saw it. They had to get rid of 3 candidates at least who had said appalling things. I mean, we've talked about wokeism just now, and I know we're going to talk later about the appalling attacks and threats
of Jess
on Jess Philips.
Yeah, female MPs.
If you cast your mind back in time, there was a time when all the papers were sneering at Harriet Harman, calling her Harriet Harperson, and Moves for Equality, which is about equal pay and, things like that. Actually, it was sneered at. So I think it's dangerous. I think if you can say to people, oh, boys will be boys, that's OK. But they also need to understand that doesn't give them free rein. But on the upside of it, I think anything that engages young people with politics is good. And I would, personally, I would lower the age to 16, but I would make it compulsory.
Claire, you said that you think it's quite patronising what Jo said about young men not actually being able to make their minds up. What do you mean by that exactly?
Well, I just mean that we're forming these young characters.
Lads, haven't you?
I've got one lad, I've got 3 girls, and my boy's my youngest. And I think it'd be quite patronising for him to have received from the mainstream media, look, you know, what this man said is wrong, don't take his view, form your own. If you're asking them to form their own, they're going to come up, surely their parents and from their home, they should have the values and the virtues in order for them to live and live extremely well and very good, kind lives. So for all this bluster about, you go to the footy, boys will be boys, there is a differential here, and I'm afraid it's had to come back to maybe this hostile, misogynistic, sexist language in order for the boys to actually find out a place where they are in society. Because at the moment, a lot of them are disenfranchised and they don't have their place. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to behave. They don't know which way they're supposed to behave for fear. Fear, Jo, of being cancelled or being shouted at or being called names.
Yes, that's fine, but I think, you know, what I'm saying is that it's all very well for somebody of 60 who is, you know, he's a smart communicator, but not everybody is. And there are people out there, let's say Frank Hester, for instance, you know, let's move away from reform, talk about a man who gave millions of pounds to the Tory party, said appalling things about Diane Abbott, and it took days for Rishi Sunak to even condemn it as racist and misogynist. And I think there is a tendency amongst certain groups of people who go, oh, that's all right, I wasn't being offensive, I wasn't being racist, I wasn't being misogynist. And I think Claire's absolutely right. We do need to support and help young people going through the absolute, you know, labyrinth of what's going on social media, and we know what's going on with...
It's interesting you say that you would give the vote to 16-year-olds, but at the same time you're also saying that they are, in a slightly, as Claire put, slightly patronising way, they're not together enough to make up their mind on what Nigel Farage is saying to them.
But I think that goes back to what Claire said, which I agree with. It needs to be taught in schools. You know, you can go to a primary school and you can have, you know, the teacher will say, right...
Sorry, what do you mean needs to be taught in schools?
The understanding of politics with a small p, and engagement and collaboration and having conversations that mean a quid pro quo. So you get a group of primary school children, you say it's Friday afternoon, it's raining, we're going to watch a film. Who wants to watch Finding Nemo? Who wants to watch Frozen, whatever it is? And they understand the principle of, you know, more people voted for Nemo, So, you know, so it's a sort of inbuilt thing. But if you grow up without anybody actually talking about politics other than saying, oh, they're all the same, it's not going to make any difference, it's really hard for young people to find out what happens in politics.
Well,
and how
according
it works.
to you, they get cancelled if they take instruction or they take advice from someone like Nigel Farage, especially if they're male.
Well, let's move away from Nigel Farage for a little bit and look at, you know, if you look back, Jeremy Corbyn appeared at Glastonbury. He got a huge youth following.
As did Tom Watson.
Unfortunately, I am actually going to have to call time on this one, but we can come back to it later on. Thank you.